Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today in War Thunder it is time to have a look at a new devblog for update 1.91, and this time we're having a look at the most heavily armed machine that is coming to the game in update 1.91. The heavy cruiser, the IJN Mogami, is coming to the game with 10 203mm, which are going to be attached to it. Now this basically means that the Hipper, which of course is the other heavy cruiser which is coming to the game in update 1.91 for the Germans, is outclassed, at least in main armament, by the Mogami. I would say the Hipper does have much better secondaries to it. It also has much better armor because of the idea of it has layered armor instead of just one big bulky bump. Now, the thing about the Mogami that is obviously impressive is the guns, but I don't think they're going to be as good as a lot of people think they are. And the reason for this is because of the issue with dispersion with a lot of guns in War Thunder, and also with the fact that the secondary armaments are very much lacking on it. The other thing I want to point out as well is not to be confused by something. So, if you have a look at this picture, you can see the front three turrets here. These front three turrets look like they are all able to at least fire forward in some certain way. Maybe the fact that this can maybe just gallant past this one. And then if you have a look at this picture, it makes it seem like the same is going on. Now, if you look here, you may be thinking that you can maybe get 6 guns on target very easily when it comes to getting them on the front of a ship. You know, being able to try and shoot shots forward, you can get 6 203s on easily. Well, that's just not the case. So here is the Mogami when it was on the dev server. You can see that the guns are actually too long compared to the turret in the front, therefore they have to go above it. So this means in order to get 6 guns to fire going forward against an enemy, so if you're going straight towards them, you're going to have to go at quite an extreme angle of maybe 20 degrees, maybe even 25 or 30, to be able to get them down and firing. Now, so just understand that. Don't be confused by this picture. I'm going to mainly use my video as a reference for this video. If you want to learn about some of the history of the Mogami, there's a wonderful little historical background here about it. Unfortunately, it was a machine which didn't last through World War II. All of them were destroyed, or at least the class were destroyed, and there was 4 of them. They're all annihilated by the end of the war. The Americans did an incredible job at that, especially after Pearl Harbor. Now, let's talk about some of its other stuff. The fact is, when we have a look at the Mogami, one of the most impressive things is, of course, its guns. Now, let's talk about why I think there are a few issues with them that many probably either don't know about, or if they haven't watched this video, are not sure about. The first thing is the HE. So the HE on the Mogami has a TNT equivalent of 7.75 kilos. That's a pretty decent amount, and it means that you're able to put quite a large hole in whatever you're firing at. The problem is the penetration. So 93, 80, and 59 at 1,000 meters. So you're generally going to be using this thing from ranges of maybe 5,000 to 10,000. That's generally where you're going to fight people. So you're looking at around 60 to 70 millimeters of pen at most, and at least around about 60 millimeters. That's not a lot against other heavy cruisers and other light cruisers. So you're going to be setting a lot of fires. You might be able to get a lucky hit on specific ammo racks, but if you're facing something like a Hipper, which is going to be able to, hit you hard alongside the Mogami, hitting it back, then the penetration I don't think is going to be up to snuff, because this penetration couldn't even penetrate the turrets on the Hipper class. Now, what is also interesting is if we move on to the next shell, which is a rank 1 upgrade, so it wouldn't be too hard to get. It's an APCBC shell, which has good trajectory. It has a lot less explosive mass, so we're talking about around 3 kilos, so still good enough as long as it is set off. And what is interesting is, so at 1,000 meters, you have 364, 323, 133, which is pretty decent. It's not as good, once again, as the Hipper, but it's good enough to go through anything that you're going to be able to fight at this tier. The weird thing is the drop-off. So if you go all the way to 10,000 meters, it goes to about 123, 109.45, which is pretty standard. And then from 10,000 meters to 15,000, it goes to 43 millimeters. Now, if you look at the Hipper, or if you look at any other gun, this drop-off doesn't exist in this most extreme way. So my feeling is either this is a bug, or the shell drop-off is just so insane that the easiest way to deal with the Mogami is just to keep it at range and just batter it to death with either something like a USS Atlanta or something like the Hipper, because it's not going to be able to pen you, it's not going to be able to do what you want it to do, which is incredibly sad for a machine which has so much firepower. It also has access to a bunch of different torpedoes and stuff. That's the Atlanta. Let's get back onto the Mogami. There we go. It has access to a variety of torpedoes when it comes to the amount. You have 24 of these Type 93 torpedoes, and they're not bad torpedoes. They're very good torpedoes. The thing is they come in sets of 3 on the sides of the machine. You can see them in the little blisters here. So what you do is you get 2 reloads on each of the 3. So technically you have 12 per side, but you do have to wait for the reload on them. And also, they will count as a pseudo ammo rack, unfortunately. So this is a Type 93 in-game, 2,700 kilos. Travel distance is 20 kilometers, so it's going to go across the majority of maps. Maybe not the new one if you go at it at an angle. The depth stroke is only 1 meter, so it should be able to... you should be able to shoot them out the water pretty easily. The arming distance is 50 meters, so that's not a terrible thing. And the explosive mass is 490 kilos, so this is going to put a big dent in whatever it hits. The speed, though, 91 kilometers an hour, is very good. Incredibly good for what it is. And as I said, you get 24 of them, so 12 per side in 2 sets of 6, and then 2 sets of 3 on each of the little areas. So it is nice to have that. The other thing I do want to comment about the Mogami, the interesting thing about ships is that even though they get bigger. Normally, when something gets bigger, especially when it comes to, like, let's say ground forces or air forces, because gravity is such a big factor, and there's also the issues of friction and also the issues of weight, where water is a lot more flexible in that regard. The fact is, if you have a much larger machine on land, it's going to take a hell of a lot of power to be able to move around the same as a much lighter machine. Whereas with something like the Mogami, you can see its max speed is still 64 kilometers an hour in Naval Realistic, and it gets up to that without really worrying too much, It's a very fast machine when it's fully upgraded, and can easily keep up with pretty much everything that's around it. The problem, though, is the way that the smokestacks are set up. So you can see here that you have the engines down below. There's a decent amount of them, producing a lot of power, but there is only one smokestack which everything feeds into. So if you hit that one smokestack, it's going to pretty much knock out this Mogami's ability to be able to, actually move itself. So taking it out or making it immobile is not that hard to do compared to a lot of other machines which have 2 or have much more spread out smoke funnels. I think it will be one of these machines that once hit, it's going to really feel it, either in the torpedo department or in the gun department, since the guns themselves, they only have 25 millimeters, where the Hippers have over 100. On the front of them, I should say. And then, the Citadel armor is good, but the extremities, as I said, like the smokestack and everything else, are incredibly lightly armored. So for me, when I look at the Mogami, it doesn't actually seem as impressive as first thought, if you only focus on the belt armor and the guns themselves. There's also an issue with the guns, and the main issue with the guns is the fire rate. I'll show you here in the video where we're shooting at a destroyer, and you can see the fire rate on the guns is incredibly slow. I timed it, and it was around about each gun was firing one round every 20 seconds. It felt around there. It might be a little bit more, it might be a little bit less than that, but overall, you're talking about around about 3 shots a minute with these guns. So therefore, if you have 3 shots a minute for 10 guns, that's 30 shots that you can get. Now, if we compare that to the Atlanta, where yes, of course the Atlanta does a little bit less in the old power when it comes to its guns, but it can get that amount of shots off in the space of 4 to 8 seconds, and because of that, it just shows you how much more those guns are going to do if they are allowed to keep firing. Now, the way that I describe it, right, so you have this interesting power balance in Naval top tier, and at least for me, it's kind of hard to work out who has the favor of it. And what I mean by this is, when you look at a Mogami, when you look at its 10 main guns, what you get out of this machine is a vehicle which is incredibly one-punch heavy. So when you hit an enemy, you can do so much damage to it that it can pretty much knock itself out of the fight. It's just gone. But you've got to be able to hit. Whereas something like a USS Atlanta, or a Brooklyn, or even the HMS Tiger to a more extreme degree, these are all machines that, if they're allowed to sustain fire, will just annihilate you. So the Mogami, with its first barrage, or even second barrage, has to do something like that I've done there, and knock out a destroyer's or a cruiser's the majority of their guns. You know, in that barrage, I was able to knock out 3 of the main turrets of this American destroyer, meaning that it would not be able to fire back. So if you're able to do that with, let's say, something like a Hipper, and being able to take out its front 2 guns, then what that means is you're going to have a very distinct advantage in the Mogami. But if the dispersion is off of the guns, if you're at range and something like an Atlanta is just opening up on you and just keeps firing and you can't do anything about it, then you're going to be in this situation where you're just going to keep getting hit over and over, and it will take you a while to die, even though you've got quite a low crew amount for a heavy cruiser. It only has 900 crew on board. But what will happen is you'll just be useless, sat there taking hits over and over and over and over again, and it just won't feel good. So the one punch that you have at the start of an engagement with the Mogami, which is made slightly worse because the turrets are quite slow, but it's still not, it's still not awful. But the one punch you have to make it count. So you have to make sure that you're ranged properly. You have to make sure that you land those hits. Otherwise, you're going to be in a state where what has happened is, instead of all that wonderful stuff, you're just going to get slowly but surely eked down by these slightly smaller machines. This also isn't bringing up the fact that the secondary armament is very much inadequate for a machine like this, meaning that it's going to be much more open to aircraft and much more open to stuff like PT boats, but I don't think that's too much of an issue. I think a lot of people are going to spawn in this first, so unless you survive like the first 5 or 10 minutes of an engagement, you won't have to worry too much about that, so I'm much more worried about the first 5 or 10 minutes. The other thing as well is there are quite a lot of decent cruisers around this Japanese area, so therefore, you have you can look forward to that to play them, and as we know, there are many machines that Japan has which can easily be added to the game as long as the models are done properly, which would do just insanely well in the game, just like the Mogami will if it's given the right circumstance, which is if it gets that one punch off instead of having to deal with the person who's incredibly agile and incredibly maneuverable. And yeah, it's just as simple as that with this ship. I think from a gameplay perspective, it's going to be really fun using those guns. The sound design around them is incredibly good. It sounds wonderful to fire the guns. I'm just a little bit worried when it comes to the actual survivability of it against something that's a little bit quicker, a little bit more nippy, and a little bit being able to just keeping up the aggression on the machine itself. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Ambrosius McClellan, B. Young, Blackie, Daniel Stanton, John Ryman, Joseph Anders, Martinez, Mopar 1969, Moxie, Super Cacti, Uyans Terry, and Elove Goats, and of course Seductive Trash Can for supporting the channel.